Clearly, the United States was part and parcel Israel's partner in this endeavor, not a question about it. The timing, I think, was kind of perfect because Russia's tied up with Ukraine, China is tied up with its own internal collapse that's happening, and the fact that their leader is under assault by competing forces within the CCP. So the timing was never better than now. And the ceasefire is just theatrics. I think the motivation of it was to basically get Iran to not activate the sleeper cells in the United States and around Western Europe.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Kerry Lutz. Kerry is the founder of the Financial Survival Network. He's a veteran financial broadcaster, best-selling author, whose latest book, The World According to Martin Armstrong, is now available, and I encourage everyone to check it out. It's a great book. Kerry, thanks so much for being on today.
Honored to be with you, Christian, and appreciate your having me.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. There's been, this supposed peace going on between Iran and Israel. Obviously, we spoke offline that it's, not the case to be. And of course, Martin Armstrong, our mutual friend, has agrees as well. I saw a recent article that he posted today on that, and so I figured we'd start off there and then dive into, your global macro take on the world, what's going on in society, et cetera. And then eventually we'll talk about your book, of course.
Hey, sure thing. Yeah, well, where do we start? But like from Martin, I learned, I call myself an algorithm decoder. And, you use cycles for that and you use pattern recognition. Martin always talks about cycles, but he doesn't really talk about pattern recognition, whether it's conscious or unconscious. He's a master of finding the cycles, finding the historical patterns. Here, this is like what's going on there. Clearly, the United States was part and parcel Israel's partner in this endeavor, not a question about it. The timing, I think, was kind of perfect because Russia's tied up with Ukraine, China is tied up with its own internal collapse that's happening, and the fact that their leader is under assault by competing forces within the CCP. So the timing was never better than now. And the ceasefire is just theatrics. I think the motivation of it was to basically get Iran to not activate the sleeper cells in the United States and around Western Europe. So if it looks like Trump's disinterested and the U.S. doesn't want it to continue, then maybe it'll give the mullahs pause for thought before activating sleeper cells, or the sleeper cells themselves self-activating, which probably is built into their control system. So, but like Israel did not have the capability of sending 200 planes, 1,400 miles each way to Iran to go on bombing runs and to come back, because the range of the F-15, 16, and F-35, even if they put on supplemental fuel tanks, isn't going to get them there, which means they needed extensive aerial refueling. And there's only one place they could get that from, the United States. And, this was a coordinated joint effort that had been planned for years. I think there's some AI planning that also took place as far as who to hit, where to hit, when to hit, first, second, third. And obviously the goal is regime change. I think it's a lot closer than it appears. They had this like million-person demonstration, anti-West demonstration in Tehran, death to America and all that, but it had the feel of a May Day demonstration in Russia or in the Soviet Union during the communist times. Their hearts were just not in it. Or a North Korean demonstration where either you come out to the square to protest in favor of the powers that be, or you're going to be severely penalized, sent to a re-education camp or whatever. So the end goal, and they're not going to stop, is regime change. Whether that requires boots on the ground, I don't know. It kind of mirrors the 1979 revolution that brought the theocracy in the first place, where one day the Ayatollah Khomeini, he was in Paris hanging out, doing recordings, and the next minute he was back in Tehran getting a hero's welcome and put back into power. And it seems like the Crown Prince Pahlavi, who's now being called the king, is kind of flipping the script and is going to happen the same way. Hope I didn't drag on too much, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, I was going to comment that it is interesting to hear various commenters speculate on who or what is going on behind the scenes, whether certain people have been subdued, so to speak, in terms of they've got other forces. I'm losing my train of thought here, but in terms of other forces, whether that's like Netanyahu or Trump, for that matter. Obviously, there's been a lot of concern within the Trump's base, of course, as it relates to his actions and things. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz. I know. I think I had Doomberg on earlier this morning. He spoke about how there's a slim chance that occurs. However, would love to hear if what your thoughts are on, or what you think Martin's are.
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly, well, it's kind of like their whole command structure has been degraded, if we're to believe what we hear. And I generally think, the taking out of the Republican Guard command structure and the fact that the supreme ruler, if he's alive, he's in a bunker, obviously not ruling from a position of strength. And there's more and more internal dissension taking place. And the real fanatics, they'll do anything that they're told to do, and they don't care. But not everyone there is a fanatic, and they're thinking of, well, if this government doesn't make it and we start doing these things, we're going to pay the price. It appears, and there's a guy, 2CTV, he's Iranian, he's got sources in there, he's getting video feeds. It appears that the regular Iranian army is gone. They're not doing anything. They've taken off. And Israel's gone out of their way to warn citizens, look, we're going to be bombing here. Get away from there. And the people have listened. They've evacuated these areas. So we're not going to know everything until this thing is complete. But I think every day that it goes on, it's going to be more and more of a challenge for the mullahs to stay in power.
Where do you? I mean, obviously, no one has a crystal ball, but where do you see things shaking out? And as it relates to the discussions, perhaps that you and Martin have behind the scenes and such.
Yeah, well, I haven't talked to him a lot about it. We talked a little bit. He sees it as going to World War III. You could make the argument we've been in World War III. We've been at war with the Iranians for 46 years. And I remember I was a student in college when the theocracy took over, and basically nobody wanted to stand up to them. The few times we did stand up to them, destroying their navy like in 15 minutes, that got their attention. So this thing was inevitable. It was going to happen. Maybe it was pre-programmed. Clearly, there could have been some alphabet agencies in place who took out the Shah and put the mullahs in charge of things. I wouldn't doubt it. It was very suspicious the way it happened. And I think that assuming Russia and China don't get involved, and I don't see how they're going to at this point, it's going to hasten the decline of Russia. It will hopefully shorten the Ukraine war because they'll lose a major ally. Even if nothing happens, Iran's not in a position to aid Russia the way they were. And it's going to weaken China and probably lead to Xi's decline and departure from power, which was, he's holding on tenuously. Every day goes on, more opposition, not just from leadership in China, but from the actual people who are suffering really badly in China. So and then we look at North Korea, and it goes all circle in the Mideast. You got to understand, it's like these countries most countries don't respect countries being nice, right? They respect power, they respect leverage, and they respect strength, especially in the Middle East. And the fact is that when America is weak, we don't get any respect. And, the key is not to be liked, it's to be respected. And to me, it's a lot like dating. Weak guys, nice guys. You know what happens to nice guys? I always say nice guys, they don't even finish, let alone finish last. They never get started. But the guys who know who they are, secure in their own persons, and, it's an analogy, but I think it's true. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now is a result of that. I'm not like a super Trump enthusiast. I don't want to come off as that. I think he's an imperfect person for sure, but I think he's got a strategy, unlike everybody else that came before him, who would just basically be co-opted by the deep state. This is not what the deep state wants. They want global governance. They want globalism. They want America as just another country, not as a leader. And we could argue about that, but the world functions better when there is one powerful nation. When there are multiple powerful nations fighting for primacy, that's when we have a lot of problems. When there's one undisputed leader, the world functions better. I think the United States has been a lousy leader in a lot of respects, but and we can't control everything, and nor should we even try. But there needs to be some accountability in the world, and when you have a multipolar power universe, there's no accountability. The prosperity the world's encountered over the last post-World War II era is from the U.S. basically securing shipping lanes, shipping routes, and really just pushing that safety of trade. So I'm not an anti-globalist per se, but I also believe that trade, you can't allow it to be weaponized like every country has done against the United States. So now we're fighting back, I guess.
Now, you mentioned about obviously the globalists and such, and I'll reference Mario Neko, who is a popular YouTuber in the macro finance space, and he just had, I believe the guy's name was John Lee. He had it titled "Israel is a pawn in the globalist game to control China, Russia, and the Silk Road." And I wanted to, that stood out to me, and I just thought I'd share that with you and perhaps get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, a pawn implies that you have little power and you get moved across the chessboard strategically. And to some extent, that might be true. But the fact is that, I don't want to get into anti-China stuff, because I just think things they've done, COVID being released, true, the U.S. helped fund it. The deep state helped fund that, which is why the truth can never be allowed to be told, but forced organ harvesting and re-education camps, it's the height of evil. So anything that we do to diminish their power and make them retrace those policies is a good thing. And for Russia, the deep state, Ukraine, there's not even a question that they caused the whole Russian-Ukraine war. What was her name? Victoria Nuland. and the whole group of them, and Biden, he was part of it, and it's a money laundering center. We saw all of this come out with USAID. So, yeah, to some extent, Israel's a pawn of the deep state, but they're also kind of involved in an existential fight. We could argue about their nuclear power, Iran's nuclear program, but they certainly had one, and they certainly had many more rockets than they needed. What did they need thousands of rockets for? Not to protect against the U.S. invasion. Basically, the U.S. has let them do what they wanted to do for the most part, and they've kept a firm grip on power. So, yeah, deep state, because deep state loves conflict, because the deep state, a vital part of it is the military industrial complex. The military industrial complex doesn't make money from peace. They make money from war. So they're the greatest beneficiaries of any hotspot on the planet. And that goes back to Eisenhower, beware of the military industrial complex. It goes back to Smedley Butler, General Smedley Butler, most decorated Marine in history, 2 Congressional Medals of Honor, who said it best, war is a racket. So, yes, that is true. But that doesn't mean that just because war is a racket, that you just say, well, this war is a racket, so it doesn't matter who wins or loses. No, the wars are created, they're made to become inevitable, but then you either have to fight it to win it, or you're going to be destroyed or lose, which could be equally as bad.
Well, in your book, and I'll reference something that Martin wrote, and I figured we'll of course revisit the book later on in the show. But Martin said, unfortunately, yes, history shows that governments often turn to war to reset debt and political issues. We saw it after the Panic of 1837. And it looks similar to today. Countries need an excuse to default on their debts, and war gives them a way out. People should be ready for more volatility, and I expect gold and silver to be safe haven assets, especially if war becomes imminent. I thought that's so pertinent.
Hey, you quoted my book here. This is like the
Yeah.
ultimate form of flattery here, Christian. Like you get quoted, it's definitely true. But I have a theory, and Martin's not big on cryptocurrency, but I'm going to share my theory with you because obviously the debts the U.S. has run up, unsustainable, can't continue, can never be paid off. We're getting to the terminal phase where the interest. My grandfather had an eighth grade education, but he always said, when you're paying interest on interest, you have a problem. That's where the U.S. is at and has been for 20 years. I've been doing the show Financial Survival Network for 14 years now, Kristen. I've been saying it, and you think, how much longer can it go on? And its trend in motion continues until it stops. And they always say the trend is your friend until the end. So, point being, I think they're going to use cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular, to basically do a debt swap and pay down the national debt. They can't do it with gold and silver because then you're ceding the world to China and Russia. And look, I'm a big gold and hard asset person, but the role, the traditional role of safe haven is always there. It's not what it used to be. I think Bitcoin in particular is probably the ultimate. You can't mine very much more of it. The U.S. already has a stockpile of huge amounts of crypto. Just the other day, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that they had seized $225 million worth of crypto. And I think it's sitting on billions. Kristen, you look back at the chart, and I think I had one in the book. Bitcoin is the greatest performing investment asset, whatever you want to call it, speculation of all time. If you had spent 10 cents in 2010 and held it, it would be worth $105,000, $110,000 now. There's nothing else that's ever been like it. And to get it to go from 100,000 to 10 million, that's only 100-fold increase. It's already done a million-fold increase. What if it does 1,000-fold increase? And then the US government's sitting on it, and then they just create a stable coin that is backed by Bitcoin and says to all of the country's creditors, here, take this coin, the debt is gone, do what you want with it. And, or they just use the Bitcoin and pay it off, and then what's left, they put into Social Security and recapitalize it. I've come to this conclusion. I've talked to other people. That's why the rush is on to create this crypto reserve. And for all we know, the U.S. could have been buying it up. Martin seems to think some alphabet agency created this stuff, but that's where I really differ from Martin, because he thinks they can just stop it anytime they want, and that might be the case, but they aren't going to as long as it serves their purposes.
I was just going to ask you that point in that some have speculated that Mossad or some other intelligence entity, and et cetera, was more or less behind it. I'm kind of agnostic myself as it relates to Bitcoin. I mean, no doubt it's seen a tremendous, returns and such, in terms of its development. So I remember someone mentioning that this is kind of more the counter argument side, if I might play devil's advocate, that obviously gold and metals have historically been seen as the means by which, or the asset that people go to protect their wealth when there's uncertainty, of course, and that in a sense crypto has usurped what would otherwise be more directed into gold per se.
Absolutely. There's not a question about it, because if there wasn't crypto, your generation and younger generations would be fleeing into gold right now. So if government created it to stop people from going into gold and silver as kind of a technological distraction, they did a great job on it. And that could be the case. Like, one thing, you're there, Martin's there, many of the people that we interact with are there, critical thinkers. Critical thinker means being open, being independent, and always analyzing your basic assumptions and your basic beliefs against reality and reassessing when you're wrong, because you are going to be wrong. In 2011, man, I thought the collapse was here and gold was going to infinite. And I was wrong. I was 100% wrong. But the thing is, I bought my gold and my silver at such pitifully low prices starting in 99, but especially loading up after the great financial crisis, that it didn't matter that I was wrong. I was so far ahead. But then for 12, 13 years, I watched the stock market blast off and the FANG stocks go. So, you know what? I was wrong because I believed that the entire collapse of the dollar and the system was inevitable. If I'd listened to Martin, I would have known, and I did listen to him to some extent, but I would have known that, until it ain't over until it's over. And the fat lady has not even started to sing yet, although she might be exercising her vocal cords and getting ready for her final verse.
Absolutely. And I wanted to pivot real quick just to something you mentioned earlier, because I wanted to ask you. Was you mentioned, and now I'm kind of pivoting quite a bit here, the kind of sleeper cells, if you will, with Iran and other potential other groups. Kind of reminds me of stuff that Michael Yon and some others talk about. Could you unpack that real quick briefly? I know we're kind of deviated for a moment, but
it's a little, well, I mean, I follow all this stuff, but the sleeper cells, obviously they've been implanted here. I think the Chinese have them. I think every country in the world has got sleeper cells in the US. Whether they intend to do anything bad or not is another question. I think it's been covered up by the FBI, a lot of things. And the deep state, who knows what their involvement with these sleeper cells is. So, we just don't know enough about them, but they're certainly out there. And, when you see a lone jihadist you have to wonder, is he really a lone jihadist? That sudden jihadi syndrome, they called it. But again, this is the part about strength. Countries can't do this to you when you're operating from strength and not weakness. And look, the United States, power-wise, not what it used to be. The dollar ain't what it used to be. But until there's a substitute, it's the system that's here. So, I don't know if there's suitcase nukes out there or they're just going to cause trouble, whatever. But it's something got to be aware of. And maybe they're having second thoughts now that they're seeing their patron obliterated. Certainly Hamas and Hezbollah are not jumping into this fray.
Gosh, there's so many different directions I could take it. I was going to comment on, okay, obviously, so there was a report, I'm sure you probably heard of it, the Deagle report. I don't know if you have any comments on that, as that kind of ties in with the nuclear backdrop, obviously, that's going on in the world, and then sleeper cells, things of that nature. I don't know.
Not overly familiar with it. I've heard about it, but
okay.
haven't. So if you could just tell me a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah. It might even sound kind of fringe. I mean, I guess it is by virtue of that. But I guess there's a site called the Deagle.com or something of that tune. And that it was put up by some type of someone from a agency three-letter agency background or military background. And it circulated quite a bit, this report. It originally was published in 2013, I believe, around 2014. Saying that around this time there's supposed to be some hits in the population, and obviously there's a lot of stuff that circulates, but I don't know if Martin or you ever dived into that, or it's just intriguing lately.
It was giving the population after whatever event was going to occur, and I thought about it, and look, it's clear that whatever path we're on now doesn't seem sustainable for the long run, just from the population explosion alone and pollution and all of that. So I thought about it, and the numbers were really interesting. Like the US would have like 20 million people left after this extinction event. China would have a couple 100 million. And yeah, it gave like the world population. I remember that now. I haven't thought about it in a long time, though. Anything is possible. Yogi Berra said it best. Prediction is very tough, especially when it's about the future.
There you go. Yes. And obviously, you've recently published your book. Would love to kind of segue to that as it ties in with what's going on. And I want to mention, yep, there's your book.
There it is. Available wherever fine books used to be sold, including Amazon.
Love it. Well, I was reading it this weekend, and I find Martin Armstrong's work fascinating. Of course, I've been privileged to have him on a couple times on the show, and I love how he draws. Obviously you can see behind me, I've got all this history stuff. It's amazing how you can reference various historical epochs, whether it's from a currency standpoint, financial standpoint, what prompted a war. It's so fascinating to me. Can you share about, your experience writing this book, what prompted you to do it, and the relationship you have with Martin and such?
So what I realized after talking to him for almost 14 years is we had a bunch of disjointed conversations and lasting in length from like 25 minutes to an hour, because you could talk to Martin forever, honestly. And I was looking through them, and I didn't even remember the one in 2018 where, he always said the Dow was in for a massive increase. From the day I talked to him, I think the first day it was like 32,000, he said. Well, in 2018, he said the Dow is going to go somewhere in 22 to 24, it will hit 45,000. And, I didn't even think about it because I just assumed he was going to be correct because he'd been right all along. And at that time, I think the Dow was around 22,000. And then I was going through some of my notes and I said, man, he like nailed it, because December 14th, I think it was December 14th, the Dow hit 45,000. And, he's old timer, so he talks about the Dow. He's not talking about FANG and all that. The Dow is reliable in that it's been around for so long. It's not the best index by any stretch, but it's a nice little shorthand to use when talking about the market. And when I saw that, I said, how many other things did we talk about that came to pass? And, I looked at, gold. He told me for years that gold was doing nothing. And he was right. For like 10 years, it did nothing until COVID. And, he was spot on there. So many things. So I felt like, I've got all of this stuff in my archives. I'm sorry, it was December 4th, 2024. I always get that confused. I have so much of this in my archives. I've kept everything. So I got to go through here and I got to write a book, because nothing's going to prove his thesis more than this. And even Martin has never written a book about starting from his early forecast to his recent forecast. Things were in there like breaking of the Swiss franc peg to the euro, which was a big deal when it happened. Increasing real estate prices, so many things that are in that book which have come true. And and then when I read the book and I really thought about it after writing it, I said, no wonder they wanted this guy out, because he predicts events that the powers that be tell you no one could have seen happening. They weren't impossible. Nobody could have predicted the crash of 07, 08, 09, and yet somebody did. And so they couldn't deal with that. So they discredited him. They locked him away for 11 years for ridiculousness. And the proof is that he gets out, and companies, banks, countries still paying him huge sums of money for his forecasts. So I really felt like you needed a compendium so people can actually look at what was said real time at the dates. And I summarize it, and I basically let people know exactly what he said. And then you make your own conclusions, but understand that what's in this book is transcribed from our discussions. And, some of the, look, you're dealing with a future. You can't be correct in everything, but the sovereign debt collapse, he nailed to a T. The only thing was that, they were able to paper it over, but the effects of the European sovereign debt crisis, and eventually ours, are still very much alive. They've just been swept under the rug till they come up next time. This is the thing. When somebody can look at systems and see where they're heading and actually make forecasts to the day, like the stock market collapse in 1987, he called that to the day. One time he saw what was happening with silver and the attempt to rig the market, and he kind of let the cat out of the bag. And the next thing you knew, Warren Buffett was dumping his silver position. Nobody understood what was really going on, but Martin was always there. And I guess he didn't make any friends along the way, or not the right friends, because he wouldn't lie and he wouldn't cover for these people. So they had to do their best to get him out of the picture. And they did for 11 years, but now he's back. And I would argue he's probably more influential than ever, because he's not running money, because it's purely advisory at this point.
Well, I wanted to mention real quick that, and this is to your point where people have tried to suppress him and such, is I had him on, I think, last week, and it's been getting, a lot of traction, a lot of views and such, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed in the comment section, there was just a barrage, Kerry, of negative comments, like just a barrage. I couldn't believe it. And you and I know when you upload a video on YouTube, you can see the like and dislike, ratio and such. And I noticed that there were no dislikes at all. Why would somebody take the
Yeah.
time to leave a review where there's more energy involved in that, but not simply hit the like button? I mean, it's such a low energy thing to do. It's just quick. It's like, boom, done, dislike. None of that. And so I came to the realization, these are freaking bots. These are
You got
freaking
it.
bots.
Okay, I did a thing called The Trolls, The Truth, and Martin Armstrong, and I'm somewhat suppressed on YouTube, but they've lightened up recently. They're actually monetized my channel. Like, I never asked them to do it, but they did it again. I could care less because that was never my business model. But what you say is so true. I've gotten over 6,000 views, 99.3% likes, 546 of them. The troll comments, all right, I used to ignore them and just not even think about them, but I started going through them and I would click the user on YouTube, and it's invariably somebody that's been there less than a month or less than a year. And here's one. Jovan Crane, he posted 9 hours ago. And when did Jovan become a YouTube viewer? January 23rd, 2025. He just discovered YouTube, Christian, 5 months ago. Isn't that a coincidence? And almost all of them are like that. He says, humanist, imposter, coward. So you know what we do with him? We hide him from the channel. I didn't used to do this, but the patterns, 4 or 5 of them will come in within 10 minutes. It's just not possible. And it's really not. And, you see it all the time. If somebody told me I look sick, I could care less what they think. The post he's got post deleted. It looks like he came around. This guy, he's been around a year. He might be real. Maybe I do look sick. I don't know. But I never bothered doing anything with these because I just didn't care. But now I see it's a fight for narrative control. So if it's a legitimate gripe, like Martin was wrong on such and such a date, so I don't agree with him, fine. That's great. But these ad hominem attacks that have no basis in fact, he's a fraud, or they'll go back to his trouble with the law. All right. They just hold no weight. Okay. Tell me what was wrong about the 2024 call for the Dow, and then we can talk. But don't give me baseless attacks. So but what you're saying is 100% true. The likes, you would think if they were real, they would click the dislike button, but they don't. They just leave stupid comments, and you're seeing a concerted effort. And Martin knows it too. He's tried to fight back against it by kind of, counter narrative. And then he's been called out for doing it. So he can't win. So it's kind of up to us to do it. And, every now and then I'll just say, obviously you're a troll. What else don't you like about him? I never get a response ever. When I respond back to them, there's never a response, which is definite sign of a troll.
Yeah, and I actually expunged those comments that were on there because, and look, I'm all about free speech, and if people want to vocalize or they're dissatisfied with something, like vocalize it. But when it appears to be like blatantly like just a bot and it does not engender discourse in a way that is productive in nature, then to your point, it's narrative control. And I think about that too when I create content, because I guess I could be like every other person and be twerking or doing these short form cute videos or this or that. But I've decided that, hey, like I enjoy learning about the markets and geopolitics and things. I'm not like some expert in it. I'm learning a hell of a lot by virtue of having great people on, such as yourself and Martin, et cetera. But I do think about sometimes, Kerry, how it's like, well, geez, am I opening up, getting, whether it's demonetized or, is this going to really stifle my, fill in the blank? So, yeah.
Well, there's good news on that front, because YouTube what's their name? Alphabet, the parent, is going to be split up. I don't think there's any question about it. So the reason that they're kind of easing off on a lot of demonetization is because they know, like, for the past 10 years, they haven't been run like a profit-making entity here. They've been strictly used for narrative control. And now they're actually going to have to turn a profit on their own. They've always been profitable, don't get me wrong, but they haven't been maximized profitability. They have been profitable in spite of squelching content from half the population. So this is all going to change, and they're split up into different segments. That's my guess is going to happen because they lost that antitrust action. But you would think that a entity that's so concerned about disinformation and all this would monitor those comments for obvious trolls. But for some reason, when it comes to our viewpoint, they never do.
That's spooky. That's spooky, and it makes me think that if you get big enough, I mean, obviously, Tucker. I'll use Tucker for example. I mean, obviously, he's got a pretty global audience, if you will. And I remember him posting a video where he was chastising Mike Pompeo and such, and I saw in the comment section, people talking about, hey, once you get too big beyond a point, it's like, are you inviting the potential for some accident to happen, or this person killed themselves, or his private plane went down, or just, I don't know, just you think about those things, because I feel like the more I learn about this world in the alternative media space, it's kind of scary in that this isn't the most safe arena to be in, especially if you get big and vocal.
Yeah, and that's I believe it's going to happen. It's not going to happen, that it happens to people all the time. They get taken out. And Nancy Pelosi, of all people, explained exactly how they do it. A wrap-up smear. They leak a story to the media, then the media publishes it, unattributed sources, then the politicians quote the media, then the media quotes the politicians, and then it goes back and forth. And before you know it, you've been marginalized. Interestingly enough, Tucker Carlson's father was a deep stater. I think he was CIA, if I'm not mistaken. And so he knows a thing or two about it. And if it wasn't CIA, he was USAID, Dick Carlson. And it was, it's just kind of funny because he was director of Voice of America and associate director of the United States Information Agency. So this guy, Tucker, knows where the bodies are buried, literally.
Spooky stuff. As it relates to the book and just general takeaways you want to distill with the audience, any other things that you'd like to mention, perhaps misconceptions that you want to dispel, whether it's the book or the broader world at hand, or even advice, if you will?
Okay, so just that you have to look beneath the surface. Google used to enable you to deconstruct stories. So you could type in the phrase du jour, and then you could run a search on it, and then you could see where it came from, the source of it. But then they started this curation thing, and it lost its utility for that. So there's a couple of services, I think, they're not a sponsor or anything, Ground News, where that'll give you the source of stories, where they actually came from. But always question it, and question your own beliefs as much as you question anybody else's, because yours are as likely to be wrong as anybody else's. Hopefully not on the major points, but a lot of the problem with the internet and life in general is that people accept their feelings as facts. And feelings are not facts. Feelings can guide you to finding facts, but they in themselves are not facts. And just because you believe something doesn't make it true. And That's the situation that we're in. And everybody thinks they're an expert because all of you out there have access to the same information or much of it as everyone else. But you don't really look to see where that information came from. Like, for instance, a close friend of mine, we disagree politically. He believed that Trump, as part of Doge, had actually laid off air traffic controllers and people who safely, who service the equipment. And I just said, that's an out and out lie. Didn't happen. They got rid of a certain number of people, yes, but not the people behind the screens at the control centers. And he actually Googled it, and he couldn't find any proof that they had gotten rid of any air traffic controllers. So that's just one example. One time I read a story and I so wanted it to be true. And basically, Mayor Bloomberg had his war on big sugary drinks, on double gulp sodas. And there's a story that he went to this famous pizzeria in Brooklyn and he had a slice of pizza and he asked for a second slice. And the owner of the place said, Mr. Mayor, you're looking a little paunchy there. You shouldn't have that second slice. And this blew up the internet. And I quoted it. I totally believed it because I wanted it to be true, because it just reinforced my worldview, reinforced my view of Nanny Bloomberg. But sure enough, it turned out not to be true. And I got punked. And man, I should know better. But I still wanted something to be true so badly that I didn't bother investigating. And that's what happens. And that's why, if I'm saying it, Christian, you're saying it, Martin Armstrong saying it, don't just accept it. Go beyond the curtain, research it, get the book, see what he's actually said in his own words, and research it. Google still has its uses, but you can use Grok, you can use AI. Generally, they're not going to lie about facts that are already out there in the open. They might hide them. There are algorithms to keep things from you, but you can be sure that, look, I remember reading in Free Republic. I used to be a very big, viewer on that site, a lurker mostly. And 1 or 2 years before 9/11, they said there were men in the building who were laying explosives to blow the place up. Okay? I thought, this is complete, utter nonsense, garbage. But it was there. And, then 9/11 happened. And I said, well, maybe those guys weren't so crazy. The only problem was when I went back to look at it and research it, it was memory hold. Could not find any indication anywhere that this happened. They're all gone. And I don't know that it was true, but man, it said people who looked like they were government workers were setting it up. And the plan was to blow the trade centers a year or two before they actually got blown up. And then the 9/11 plan emerged, and that's what happened. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just telling you, I read this with my own eyes. And as sure as I'm sitting here talking to you, and I think I am talking to you, I think we could agree on that fact. I know I read it, all right? And nobody's been able to explain what really happened on 9/11. Yeah, we know certain facts, and certain facts are true, but it's not the whole story. And I'm not a 9/11 truther. I just know what I read a year or two before it actually happened.
Yeah, I was really blown away by the interview Tucker Carlson did with one of the former congressmen. Perhaps you may have seen that one.
Yes. Yes,
Wow.
yes, I did see it.
Wow.
Yeah, he was the original 9/11 truther. And God, he was congressman from Pennsylvania, from York, Pennsylvania, that area. I cannot remember his name for the life of me, but they raided his kids, they raided his office, and it was enough to get him defeated as congressman. And And then he kind of fell into the void, and nobody ever heard from him again.
I think his
So
name was Kurt Weldon.
Kurt
Could be
Weldon,
wrong.
that was it. Yes,
Yes.
Kurt Weldon.
Yeah. I,
And
I,
yeah,
I was going to comment. You could see him fuming. You could see the emotion just emanating out of him. I mean, this guy things were really bottled up. So very alarming. And
yeah, I remember, and that's the proof. Is Kurt Weldon any different than Martin Armstrong? It's just Kurt Weldon shut his mouth, so he didn't go to jail. Martin had been opening his mouth for so many years. When you like crash a Warren Buffett trade, you think they don't remember that? You know, and he just like talked like to one reporter or something who reported it, and the next thing you knew, Warren Buffett was getting out of silver, and is like he didn't have anything good to say about metal for the rest of till now. You know, so Kurt Weldon, and there's been many others just like him that have been excised. As long as you talk from theory like you and I do, doesn't matter. When you start speaking from personal experience and people you've met and you blow the whistle, then things are going to go wrong in your life.
very spooky. I know Dave Collum in his year in review and such, he's talked about, I mean, he's just one person. Of course, many people have talked about it. Whistleblowers getting, whacked, this, that, and the other, where, it was Boeing, or the young gentleman in, I think it was in SF with, Chat G, or excuse me, yeah, it was Open AI. Just all these things. It's pretty spooky.
Well, when you look at tech, like look at that certain company called Facebook, Meta, right? The cover story is this guy, nerd guy, I guess in Stanford, and he just wants to build a program to get chicks, right? Because he's geeky and he has no money and nobody's interested. And then coinciding with that, DARPA has a project called LifeLog, and you can look all this stuff up. It's established fact. And LifeLog's purpose was to document every interaction in somebody's life. Does that sound familiar? And that was there for a few years. And what happened on February 4th, 2004? LifeLog is discontinued by DARPA. And what corporation is started on February 4th, 2004, which they also like numbers like that. That's 244. Okay. The deep state loves these number games. Facebook founded 2004, February 4th. So you tell me, is the public, that book that was written about them, The Network, is that true, or is there a different truth? I'm not making this up. You can look at Wikipedia and see it for yourself. It's like, to the day, they're not even trying to hide it here, Christian. And they're not going to do anything to me for this because they want you to know. They want you to know, and then they want you to not believe it. And
Crazy
it's there,
stuff.
right? It's there. I assume you looked it up, right? It's there. 2004, 2004. Then, it was obvious, the Zuck is working on this thing, trying to figure out how to pick up chicks. And he gets a knock on the door. And somebody from some agency says, how would you like to not only pick up chicks, but be a multi-billionaire? And all you got to do is, we've already written the code. You just take the code, you incorporate it in there, and here's your marketing program. Here's a check, and have fun. So the surprising thing is that the Winklevoss twins are still around to like tell the story, but they're not telling the story either. Everybody's got a non-disclosure. Everybody's mouth is shut. And that's just one thing that you can look up for yourself. So we got cut off a little bit there, Christian, but while
Yes.
you were at it, while you were off the call, I decided to research it. And, it's I don't believe in coincidences that DARPA just happened to end the program right when the Zuck decided to start it. It's just too coincidental. And, I think it was called The Social Network, the book and the movie. And it's an origin myth created to cover the true purpose, because when they're investigating somebody, first thing they do is run a Google search, which is becoming less and less useful. And then they go to Facebook and social media. And we already know from the Twitter files that Musk, the few that he did release, he didn't release all of them, but we know from that there was like 100 some odd spooks working at Twitter, that he fired all of them. Even Jim Baker, the guy who was the counsel at the FBI that helped try to frame Trump in Russiagate, he was there, and Elon fired them all. It just, you can't make this stuff up. So never believe in coincidences. Always, a coincidence is a sign that you need to look further because something isn't adding up. Coincidences happen in life, yes, but convenient coincidences are too convenient. And when I see one, I always try to look underneath the surface.
Well, I was going to share with you a quote. From FDR's wife. I think she said in politics, and I guess this by extension applies to what we're talking about. But in politics, nothing happens by accident. Everything is very much contrived and controlled. Kerry, it's been a real honor having you on. I hope to have you on again here sometime soon. Congratulations on the book. How can people learn more
Yes.
about you and get in touch?
All right. So financialsurvivalnetwork.com, the book available wherever fine books used to be sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those great places. It's selling, sold nearly 2,000 copies in the course of basically 2 months. And it continues to sell like every day. 10, 20 copies go out the door with minimum of promotion, because Martin's wisdom and his knowledge of cycles and history, it's irresistible for anybody who is at all curious about why things are happening. So, and financialsurvivalnetwork.com, if anyone wants to shoot me an email, put up my email address, kl@kerrylutz.com. We answer everything, and it's been a real honor being on the show with you and a lot of fun.
Same here, Kerry. And take care. And again, hope to have you on in the near future.
All right.
Quick ask. Over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And, of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.